As a psychologist, I've met many people who seem to have it all. Successful careers, recognition, stability. They're the ones others look up to, the reliable ones, the overachievers, the perfectionists. From the outside, their lives look flawless. They meet deadlines, keep promises, and never let anyone down. Their calendars are full. Their smiles are practiced, their energy endless. But when the door to my office closes and the mask comes off, a different story unfolds. Behind the accomplishments, I often find exhaustion. Behind the discipline, fear. Behind the drive, a quiet, aching sadness. These are people who've spent their entire lives trying to earn their worth. Not out of greed or ambition, but out of survival, because somewhere along the way they learned that love must be earned, not given. This is the story of one such person, Anna, a high-performing professional in her mid-30s. She worked in a fast-paced industry, respected by colleagues, admired by friends. She was always the one people turned to when things needed to get done. The one who made the impossible look effortless. But what no one saw was the cost of that perfection. Every success came with anxiety, every compliment with self-doubt, and in the quiet hours after midnight, when the world finally stopped demanding, Anna still couldn't rest, because for her, rest felt like failure. This is not just a story about burnout, it's about the invisible prison of perfection, and what happens when a person who has done everything right realizes she no longer knows who she is without achievement. Anna worked in IT, the kind of person everyone could rely on. Her inbox was never messy, her projects always delivered on time, and her tone in meetings was calm, precise, and professional. She wasn't just solving technical problems, she was solving the chaos around her, quietly holding the team together. Every morning she arrived before most of her colleagues, a coffee in hand, reviewing emails as the city outside slowly came to life. Her desk was immaculate, a reflection of her mind, or at least the part of it she allowed the world to see. Color-coded folders, neatly stacked notebooks, pens perfectly aligned, a small universe of order in an otherwise unpredictable world. Each completed project brought a fleeting sense of relief. Seconds later, the voice returned. You could have done better. No praise, no recognition, no promotion could silence it. Compliments felt hollow, achievements were never enough, and she carried the fear of being exposed like a hidden scar. During team meetings, she smiled at jokes, nodded at ideas, and offered thoughtful input. Max, her colleague, would tease her about being the perfect machine, and she would laugh politely, hiding the internal churn of anxiety and self-criticism. Sophia, her supportive friend at work, would bring her coffee or ask how she was doing, and Anna would respond warmly, all while keeping the storm of self-doubt tightly sealed inside. Even lunch breaks, which should have been moments of rest, were filled with planning her next tasks, reviewing her performance, or answering emails on her phone. She had learned early in life that achievement was safety, that love, approval, and recognition came only with measurable success, and so she pushed herself relentlessly, convincing herself that this constant pressure was normal, even necessary. By evening, when the office quieted and the city lights reflected on the windows, Anna sometimes stayed behind, alone with her laptop and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. She scrolled through unfinished tasks, imagined future deadlines, and replayed conversations, searching for flaws she might have missed. Success for Anna was never sweet or celebratory. It was survival, a way to silence the inner critic that had been with her since childhood, whispering that she was never enough. And though she wore the mask of competence, efficiency, and calm, beneath it, her heart carried the quiet ache of someone who had forgotten how to rest, how to celebrate, how to simply exist without judgment. In therapy, we traced Anna's perfectionism back to her childhood. It wasn't dramatic abuse or harsh words. There was no yelling, no overt punishment, but the absence of praise for anything less than perfect was deafening. A B grade on a report card, a small mistake in a piano recital, an imperfection in a drawing, all were met with silence. Not anger, not disappointment expressed, just quiet, and that quiet spoke volumes. Love in Anna's household was conditional. Affection came only when she performed flawlessly. Recognition was tied to achievement. Smiles and warm words were reserved for success, while anything less than perfect was met with subtle withdrawal. A raised eyebrow, a nod without comment, a quiet sigh. Over time, Anna learned a fundamental truth: being loved meant performing flawlessly. She internalized this lesson deeply. From her earliest memories, she linked her worth to measurable outcomes. Success became more than a goal. It became the currency of acceptance, the key to safety. Mistakes were dangerous, imperfection threatening. Even in her early playdates and schoolwork, she measured herself against invisible standards, anticipating disapproval before it arrived. By adolescence, this pattern had solidified. Anna's accomplishments were impressive, but they were rarely celebrated for what they were. The internal voice was relentless. You could have done better. You should have tried harder. No matter how much she achieved, it was never enough. And the quiet approval of her parents was a fragile, elusive reward she chased tirelessly. This blueprint shaped her adulthood. Every success, every project completed, every compliment received, it carried the echoes of those early lessons. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the relentless striving for perfection, all of it traced back to a childhood where love was never unconditional, only earned. Anna's story illustrates a universal truth. Early experiences can silently sculpt our adult minds. The patterns of conditional affection, subtle judgment, and unspoken expectations can drive a lifetime of striving, often without joy, and always under pressure. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour shift, Anna returned home. Her body ached from hours of concentration and tension, her shoulders stiff, eyes red and dry from staring at screens. Yet instead of resting, she opened her laptop again. Not out of necessity, not because there were urgent emails, but because resting felt unsafe. Silence meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant guilt. Every notification, every email, every unfinished task whispered in her mind, "You didn't do enough. You could have done better." Even small achievements felt temporary, as if the approval of others could never balance the weight of her own expectations. She sank into her chair, the soft glow of the laptop casting pale light on her face. Around her, the apartment was quiet, peaceful, but inside her, tension coiled tighter and tighter. The breaking point didn't announce itself with drama. There was no yelling, no crashing of objects. It was subtle, a quiet collapse, an internal unraveling that no one could see. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly, not knowing where to type, or if she should type at all. Thoughts raced. I'm falling behind. I should be doing more. I'm not enough. Each one gnawed at her, eroding confidence she had built painstakingly over the years. Tears began to sting, a lump forming in her throat. She tried to push it away, tried to summon the armor of competence she always wore, but it wouldn't come. Her breath felt shallow, her chest tight. She pressed her hands against her temples, feeling the fatigue of not just her body, but her mind, the mental exhaustion that comes from decades of self-imposed perfection. Memories of childhood crept in, the subtle disapproval, the quiet sighs, the silent lessons that love and acceptance were conditional on achievement. She realized how deeply those lessons had rooted themselves in her psyche, shaping every choice, every step, every moment of self-doubt. For the first time, Anna acknowledged her human limits. She admitted to herself that she could not continue this relentless pursuit without collapse. And in that acknowledgement, a strange, fragile relief began to emerge. Recognition of her exhaustion was the first step toward self-compassion, a tiny crack in the armor she had worn for decades. This quiet collapse became a turning point. For the first time, Anna glimpsed the possibility that life did not have to be an endless cycle of achievement and self-criticism, that perhaps, just perhaps, she could allow herself to rest, to make mistakes, and still be worthy. And in that moment, in the silence of her apartment, something shifted, a subtle awareness that her value was not defined solely by what she accomplished, but by the person she was, flaws and all. In our sessions, we began exploring a radical idea for Anna, that her worth as a person was not tied to her productivity or achievements. At first, the concept felt foreign, almost impossible. She had spent decades believing that success, efficiency, and flawless performance were the only proof of her value. "If I stop achieving, who am I?" she asked one afternoon, her voice shaky, a mix of fear and curiosity. The question hung in the air, heavy with years of internalized pressure. For Anna, achievement had been a survival strategy, a way to earn love, respect, and even self-acceptance. Letting go of that belief felt like stepping into an unknown, potentially dangerous territory. We worked slowly, examining the patterns from her childhood that had instilled this relentless drive. Together, we traced how every compliment, every achievement, every silent disapproval had shaped her sense of self. We discussed how her mind had learned to equate accomplishment with safety and recognition, and how exhausting it had been to maintain this illusion of perfection for so many years. Through reflection, journaling, and guided exercises, Anna began to see herself differently. She started identifying moments when she judged herself harshly for minor mistakes or perceived failures. She learned to pause and question the inner critic. Is this really true? Or am I repeating the lessons of my childhood? The breakthrough came gradually. She allowed herself to rest, first for a few minutes, then for hours. She noticed how it felt to exist, without constant measurement, without the pressure of outcomes. The realization dawned slowly, then clearly. Simply being was enough. Her worth did not need to be earned every hour of every day. This shift was neither instant nor painless. There were setbacks, doubts, and days when the old voice of perfectionism was unbearably loud. But each time she returned to this new awareness, her sense of self grew stronger. She began setting boundaries at work, allowing herself to delegate, to say no, and to accept imperfection, both in her tasks and in herself. By the end of this period, Anna's relationship with herself had transformed. She was still dedicated, still driven, but no longer imprisoned by the tyranny of perfection. She could take pride in her work without tying it to her identity, and she began to feel the first real taste of inner peace, joy, and self-compassion she had ever known. Anna's journey illustrates a profound psychological truth. Self-worth is intrinsic. It is not something we earn through achievement, productivity, or approval. Recognizing this, even slowly, is the first step toward a life that is fulfilling, balanced, and truly human. Transformation did not happen overnight. It was a gradual, sometimes frustrating process. Anna spent months learning the unfamiliar skill of rest, not the kind that comes from mere exhaustion, but the intentional, guilt-free pause. She practiced saying no, setting boundaries, and allowing herself to step away from tasks without judgment. Each small action was a victory. Every time she refused an extra assignment, chose to take a walk instead of answering emails, or let a minor mistake slide without self-criticism, the voice in her head that had whispered, "Not enough," for decades grew a little quieter. It didn't disappear entirely. Old habits die slowly, but the power it once held over her was diminishing. Anna began to notice subtle changes in herself. She laughed more freely, without worrying about whether her work reflected perfection. She allowed herself moments of joy unlinked to achievement. A warm cup of coffee in the morning, a long walk in the park, the satisfaction of finishing a book for pleasure rather than education or self-improvement. Her relationships subtly shifted as well. She no longer felt compelled to prove her worth to colleagues or friends. Interactions became more genuine, grounded in connection rather than performance. She started to feel pride not because of what she had done, but simply because she existed and tried her best in every moment. Most importantly, Anna began to live, not to prove, not to achieve, but to feel. She recognized that life was not a checklist of accomplishments, but a series of experiences, emotions, and connections that made her human. The journey from perfectionism to self-compassion was ongoing, but for the first time in years, Anna felt a sense of balance, freedom, and authenticity she had never known. This transformation shows that letting go of relentless standards and embracing one's inherent worth is possible even for those who have spent a lifetime defining themselves by achievement. It is a process of unlearning, of quiet courage, and of discovering that being enough is not something earned, but something always present. This story reminds us of a profound truth. Perfectionism is not a sign of strength. It is fear disguised as discipline, responsibility, and diligence. For Anna, every success, every flawless execution, and every long hour of work was driven not by joy or passion, but by a deep-seated fear of inadequacy, failure, and rejection. She had been chasing a moving target her entire life, the idea that she needed to be perfect to be valued, loved, or safe. Healing begins when we recognize this pattern in ourselves, when we see that the relentless pursuit of perfection is not a badge of honor, but a burden that slowly erodes our well-being. It starts the moment we stop seeking approval, accolades, or recognition as proof of our worth. Anna's journey shows us that it is possible to let go of the fear that drives perfectionism, but it requires patience, self-compassion, and conscious effort. Anna learned to celebrate small victories, not for external validation, but for the recognition that she was trying her best and that this effort alone was enough. She allowed herself to rest, to make mistakes, and to acknowledge her emotions without judgment. She realized that life is not about flawless performance, but about growth, connection, and authentic experiences. Her relationships also transformed. By stepping back from the constant need to prove herself, she began to connect with colleagues, friends, and even strangers more genuinely. Conversations were no longer measured by achievement or comparison, but by curiosity, empathy, and shared human experience. Anna discovered that the quality of our relationships improves when we are willing to show ourselves as we truly are, imperfect, vulnerable, and real. One of the most important lessons from Anna's journey is that self-worth is intrinsic. It is not something that can be earned through accomplishments, grades, promotions, or accolades. It exists already within each of us, waiting to be acknowledged. Accepting this truth does not mean giving up ambition or responsibility. It means redefining success to include balance, self-care, and the freedom to be human. Perfectionism may whisper that we are never enough, that our best is never sufficient. But the reality is that we are already enough, simply because we exist. When we embrace this, we unlock the potential for true freedom, inner peace, and authentic happiness. Anna's story is a reminder to all of us. Life is not a checklist to complete, but a series of moments to experience. True achievement is not in the flawless execution of tasks, but in the courage to embrace ourselves fully. Our strengths, our weaknesses, our humanity. It is in this acceptance, this self-compassion, and this recognition of inherent worth that we finally begin to live, not merely survive. And so Anna's transformation is not a fairy tale ending. It is ongoing, just like life. She will still face challenges, self-doubt, and pressure, but now she has the tools, awareness, and compassion to navigate them, with her voice of fear quieter than before, and her inner sense of worth stronger than it has ever been. This is the message that Anna's journey leaves for us all. Your value is not determined by your achievements, your productivity, or the approval of others. You are enough, simply because you are. Recognizing this is the first step toward a life of freedom, balance, and true fulfillment.